Good to see you. Hey, Daddy. Where's your lovely? Is she coming today? Is she coming today?
Okay, we've got a number of things going on. I guess, I want to just remind everybody again, send the paperwork just simply indicate, so we'll know how much chicken to buy, and then you can put down what side dishes you might be bringing for this event, on December 6th. The bell ringing, we had a great first day last week, and we're scheduled to ring at Sam's this Wednesday. But I'm looking here, we've got 3 slots open that we need to make sure we cover. Because that is the #1 spot in all the places we ring in this county, and we want to make sure we do the job. So if you can put your name down on that and ring, I know it's the day before Thanksgiving, but it's just an hour. And then there's a couple of little flyers here. The Caring Corner, let's see, I believe that's already done. They got that finished.
And that's already finished too, right there.
Okay, the goodie bags are done.
I think everybody has brought their things,
Okay.
and thank you.
All right, and then, invitation to women, on December 4th, so, we'll send that around. Okay, and guess what? Our teacher just walked through the door. But, do we have any other announcements that we need to, share with the class?
Happy birthday today for my darling wife.
All right, happy birthday.
And that's at 9 o'clock at Santa's birthday tomorrow.
Yes.
Thank you for all the prayers and visits and cards and phone calls and food and everything, because I'm good now. Good to go.
That's fantastic. We're glad to see everybody can drift it back in, and it's a busy time of the year, but it's a great time of the year. We celebrate a lot of things, so if, any other announcements? All right, if not, our teacher will come out.
Good morning. It's good to see you all. There was a new couple that was in 9 o'clock service from Lakeland, Florida, so we were trying to encourage them to come today, but we'll snag them another time. It was their first time to be here this morning. I am going to pass around this little rocking chair. I learned these little audio-visual show and tell tricks from Marcia. When you're gonna teach, bring some. So I want you to take a good look at the picture of this man that's on this rocking chair and tell you that this sits in our living room where we look at it every day on the shelves right beside our television. And I'm gonna tell you a little bit about him. So take a good look and pass it around. So I'm happy that it's this month and not last, because this is the 23rd of November, and the 23rd of October was 2 days after Rich's hip surgery, and so there was that. Cindy knows. And a couple of days into that recovery, we looked at each other and said, wow, that class must really be praying, because the marriage is still holding. And then we'd remind each other what Steve Aaron said at the beginning of class about 2 months ago, which we're never gonna let you live it down. Steve stood up at the very beginning of class as we were all sharing our upcoming surgeries and said, old age is hell. So we just kept saying, you know, we gotta remind each other that. We walked into the Viewmont Surgery Center and the receptionist said to Rich, She went down through that list of questions that they asked you when they're checking you in. And she said marital status, and I was standing next to him, and before he had a chance to answer, I said, pretty strained, or about to be. And one day, about 5 days into his recovery, I muttered something, and he said, what did you say? And I said, well, if you had your hearing aids in, you'd have heard what I said. But I said, I think it's time for Cindy King and I to form a support group. So, I'm glad it's now. I asked Roger in the planning committee if I could share a few thoughts about stories this particular Sunday. I had no idea, none, until last week, that this was going to be the Sunday that, as a church, we were gonna look at the story of the prodigal son, which is absolutely perfect. And it just completely is, coordinates with what I was planning on doing. In fact, I am not going to read the story of the prodigal son from scripture before I start, because if you went to 9 o'clock, you just heard it, and you just heard a sermon on it, and if you're going to 11 o'clock, you're about to hear it, and about to hear a sermon on it. And so, it was just amazing timing. But I had said before one time in class that, I wasn't born a Methodist, but I got here as soon as I could. And I have always been really attracted to and appreciative of the ability of Methodists to use story. And initially that was, we had a long time, many years, subscription to Christian Century magazine. And when it would come, and this is the days pre-internet, and I would just tear open that magazine, that journal when it came, because I wanted to see if this month they had a story by William Willman. And because I just loved his ability to storytell. And then as I got interested and into storytelling, I discovered other Methodist ministers that were such good storytellers. And chief among them, a mentor for me and someone that I had a chance to train with, was Donald Davis. So I don't know, does that ring a bell? Does anybody hear Donald Davis? Okay, so Donald Davis was born and raised in Waynesville, and was not only the son of a Methodist minister, but became a Methodist minister, and served churches in Charlotte and this area of the Carolinas for 20 years before he finally made a complete switch from being a full-time minister to being a full-time storyteller. And he lives on Ocracoke Island. He's 80. He was born in 44, so he just turned 80. And he is the most incredible. If you just put him into YouTube, see if you can pull up a couple of clips of him as a storyteller. And then there's this other Methodist minister that we discovered later on, more recently, Bill Lepp. And Bill Lepp is an amazing talent and storyteller. And he's as I said, a Methodist minister. And a little bit about Bill that will tell you sort of the flavor of his stories is that he is a 5-time winner of the West Virginia Liars organization. So that kind of tells you his skills. But when we first visited First Methodist, we were so taken with Paul and Jennifer and Margaret's ability to use story, for story to come off the page. And it's again today. If you're going to 11 o'clock, you'll see how Paul uses story today in his sermon. I became fascinated with the intersection of faith and family stories about 30 years ago. And Jesus, in his parables, tells us true stories. They're stories full of truths for our lives. The one that we hear today in Scripture, the prodigal son, a true story full of so many truths. And people say, well, is that story real? Real, historical, did it happen? Is one way that you categorize a story. Are they a real story? But then also, is it a true story? Jesus' parables are all true. They're all full of truths. which then, because they are so full of truths, get reenacted and played out again in our lives over and over again in real stories. Stories that happen to us, stories that happen in our families. And so all I want to do today is to share with you a story, a real story from my family, from my life, that has brought to me the truths of Jesus' story in the parable of the prodigal son. So I'm going to share with you now the story that goes with that man on the rocking chair, and it's called Place Setting. When I first opened my eyes on that Thanksgiving Day in 1962, I knew it was going to be a special one. The 19th century Pennsylvania farmhouse that my parents had remodeled, restored, was already surrounded by snow all around. And the aroma of roast turkey and stuffing was drifting up the stairwell into my bedroom. Downstairs, our huge oak dining room table had already been extended by several folding tables to accommodate all of the 29 aunts and uncles and cousins and grandparents that were coming for Thanksgiving dinner. Now, I said 29, but always before, every other year, there had been 28. But this year, a new uncle was coming for Thanksgiving dinner. Well, that's not really true. He wasn't really a new uncle. He was actually a very old uncle, but he was an uncle that I had never met before, and neither had any of my cousins. My grandmother's brother, Uncle Bill, was coming for Thanksgiving dinner. I hurried downstairs to help my mother with the preparations. And I probably should tell you right then, now, that my mother was a master cook. And so now when I look back at it, she's been gone for 15 years, but when I look back at it now, I think that maybe she thought Thanksgiving dinner was sort of a cross between the Olympic time trials and college boards. Because she had casseroles and veggie dishes and breads and relishes, everything you could think of coming out of that oven, coming out of the refrigerator. And when I would go into the kitchen year after year and I'd walk up to her and say, "Mom, what can I do to help?" She would say, and she said it again this year, she'd stop and wipe her hands on her apron and look around and say, "Peggy, why don't you set the table? You're so good at it." And you know, I love setting the table, especially at Thanksgiving dinner, because that was the one time during the year that we had name cards for each person, because 29 people, how do you figure out where everyone's going to sit? So we'd have a name card for each person, a lot of times with a little pilgrim or turkey sticker on it. And then we had these ceramic pilgrim salt and pepper shakers and ceramic turkey salt and pepper shakers, and I loved that. So as I went around the table that day to set the table and to fill the water glasses and to fill the fruit cups, I came to Uncle Bill's name card, and I found myself thinking about him. I was like so curious. I mean, what was he going to be like? Was he even going to look like the rest of the family? And finally it was 2 o'clock, and it was time for the family to arrive. Grandma and Grandpa drove up first and got out of the car, and my grandmother handed her applesauce bread that I love so much to my grandfather to carry in, and then she balanced a pie as she came up the sidewalk to the house. And then Aunt Jane and Uncle George drove up in their 1960 Chevy and got out very carefully so as not to slip on the ice. And then the back door on the driver's side opened, and Uncle Harry got out. And then the back door on the passenger side opened, and an old man looked up the sidewalk toward the house. And I knew immediately this had to be Uncle Bill. No one had told me how much he looked like Uncle Harry. He had the same strong Roman nose and high balding forehead and smooth skin. He looked just like Uncle Harry. Well, I watched him that day, studied him really. and I thought I saw a glint of joy in his eyes. You know, my cousins and I were a pretty rowdy bunch as we devoured our pumpkin pie and teased each other. But he seemed genuinely glad to be with us. And he was with us every holiday after that. Every Easter, Thanksgiving, Christmas, and summer holiday picnic in the backyard. And then my path crossed his a little more substantially. And that was because Uncle Bill became a resident of the county convalescent home. Now, it was in the days pre-Medicaid, and it was actually the county convalescent home for the indigent. But I was working there. I worked there every summer and every holiday vacation from high school graduation until college graduation as a nurse's aide. And just knowing that my Uncle Bill was in the building, I would take my 15-minute morning and afternoon break, and I'd hurry down from the women's ward on the second floor where I was working, down to the first floor, the men's ward. And I would take that 15 minutes, morning and afternoon, just to talk to him. It was 15 beds in a room. He had a chair beside the bed. He sat in the chair. I sat on the edge of the bed. And we would just talk. And he told me stories, for instance, of World War I. And they were right out of the history book. And he described states in the Midwest that he had seen, but I hadn't seen yet. I have now, but I was 17 years old, and I had never been to those states. And we just shared a little bit of time, day after day, summer vacation, and holidays. And then the phone rang in my college dorm one evening in late fall. And you know, this was the days pre-cell phone, and if you remember this system, there was one pay phone in the hallway in the dorm. And when the phone rang, whoever was going by, you picked it up and you hollered out the name of the person that the call was for. And then you went down and banged on their door to make sure that they heard that that call was for them. And this night, the call was for me. And it was my parents calling from North Central Pennsylvania to tell me that Uncle Bill had passed away. And I remembered thinking, as I hung up the phone that night, that I was probably the only one of my generation, of my cousins, that was going to genuinely miss this man, because I was the one who had a chance to spend some time with him. And I thought that this story was over. It was far from over. 20 years later, 20 years, I went back to North Central Pennsylvania. And I went back from California, and by now I was a middle-aged woman who was intensely interested in family story collecting and faith stories. And I went back in part to interview my Aunt Jane, because by now Aunt Jane was the only living member of my grandmother's generation. All the other 5 siblings were gone. She had sold her big house in town and moved to a small senior apartment. I went to that apartment, sat down, put a cassette recorder, remember those? On the coffee table between the two of us. And we just took all the time we needed. I asked her questions about her life. I learned about how she played with my grandmother and their life as children out in the country in North Central Pennsylvania. And then toward the end of that interview, I suddenly thought of a question that I hadn't even prepared or thought of before. I said to her, Aunt Jane, tell me about Uncle Bill. And when I said that, I saw her breathe in kind of hard. And she said, what would you like to know? What would I like to know? There was so much I wanted to know. First of all, I wanted to know, why was he gone until I was 12? I wanted to know what she knew about his life. And the most important thing is, I wanted to know how she felt about him as her brother. And she looked at me for a long minute. And then she said softly, well, Peggy, I guess he's been gone 20 years. I guess that's time enough. Let me see what I can tell you. And she started slowly, cautiously. She said, you know, when Bill came home from World War I, he never could seem to find a place for himself, a place where he fit in. I think now that was probably PTSD, undiagnosed, untreated. But she said, we thought maybe it would get better when our father died, but it didn't. It only got worse. And then, Peggy, did anyone ever tell you that your grandfather had filling stations before the 29 crash? I said, yes, I knew that. She said, well, your grandfather gave Bill a job in one of those filling stations in town, and that seemed to help. That seemed to settle him. Until one day the unthinkable happened. She said by now Bill was 28 years old, and it turns out he got involved with a 15-year-old girl whose family lived right adjacent to that filling station. I don't know how it would be handled now, Peggy. Well, I know it wouldn't be handled the way it was, because the way it got handled then is that he married the girl, and then a year later, he abandoned her and their child. Skipped town, actually. She said, oh, don't let me forget to tell you about the job he had during Prohibition. The government was hiring Prohibition agents to turn in bootleggers, and Bill got one of those jobs. And within no time at all, he had the government check coming in to turn in bootleggers, and he also was taking bribes from the bootleggers not to turn them in. She said, yeah, that was some job. She said, you know, I know you're gonna find this hard to believe, but he came back to town after 10 years and married the same girl all over again. And then he abandoned her again. She said he was an embarrassment to the family. I think he was an embarrassment to himself. He never could keep any promise that he made. He could never shoulder any responsibility that he picked up. He could never keep any commitment, and it just went on and on. And finally, we just lost track of him altogether. And then in early summer of 1962, he came back to town. And by this time, he was old and broke and alone. And he moved into one of those housekeeping hotels. Now, Peggy, I don't know if you know what I mean by a housekeeping hotel, but those were hotels that had really cheap rates and pretty questionable housekeeping. And she said he never contacted the family. We never would have known he was down there, except someone that knew both of us told us that he was there. And I guess it would have stayed that way, except that was when your father got involved. My father? I stopped her right there. I was so surprised. This wasn't my father's uncle. This was my mother's uncle. I said, my father? She said, yes. Peggy, when Bill didn't contact us, she said, we never discussed it, never had one conversation about it as a family. But I think we all were just so disgusted with his choices that we just decided to let well enough alone. And then one day in late October, your father came through the back door of the kitchen into your house in the morning. And he said to your mom, Bernice, I need to tell you something. Uncle Bill is coming for Thanksgiving dinner. He's an old man, Bernice, and he needs family. She said it turned out that what your father had done is that he was working, do you remember, Peggy, when he was working the night shift at the steel mill? I said, yeah, he hated working 11 to 7. She said when he got off at 7 in the morning, he went right through town on 3rd Street, and he went right past the Ross Hotel, where we had been told that Bill was living. And one day, just on a hunch, he stopped the car, and he waited. And he just waited a couple of doors down from the Ross Hotel. And sure enough, his hunch was right. Bill came out of the Ross Hotel to go down the street to the diner for breakfast, and your dad got out and followed him in. And he had breakfast with him. And he did that several times over several weeks. And finally, one day at the end of breakfast, he said to him, Bill, I don't know what's keeping you away, but whatever it is, it's not as strong as the love that's waiting for you at my table. your place is set. And when she said that, we were both silent. And I think now, looking back, that she was thinking about her brother. But I wasn't. I was treasuring my father's words, because when I heard this story for the first time, 30 years after it happened, my father was already in the acute stages of Alzheimer's, and he could not remember Bill, or this story, or what he had done. But when I think about this story now, I wonder, isn't memory collective? When we're gone, or when we can't remember the good that we've done, isn't it passed on and remembered by the next generation? And if they're fortunate enough to be told, the next. My father did not need to remember anymore. Now I remember. And I remain so grateful that because of an inadvertent, casual, almost forgotten question at the end of an interview, but more importantly, my aunt's clear and courageous and truthful answer. In the end, it wasn't just my mother, but it was my father who taught me how you set a table. And now he's been gone for almost 30 years. And yet, I still remember when the story of the prodigal son came right off the pages of scripture for me, and tasting that feast, that Thanksgiving day that was spread, and watching an old man look up the sidewalk toward the house, and seeing the lost one return. Because I saw a grace that day that it wasn't just sufficient. It was more than sufficient. It was abundant. And to this day, when I approach the Lord's table, I still hear it. I still hear my Father's words. Whatever is keeping you away is not as great as the love that's waiting for you at my table. Your place is set. And I thank you for giving me the opportunity to tell this story again and work with it, because do you know that true to the parables of Jesus, the truths keep coming in your life? And yesterday, for the very first time, I asked myself the question, my father was a very unassuming man. Why did he think that it was his right? Why did he not ask the rest of the family before he asked Uncle Bill? And then the answer came to me. Because it was his table. And I thought of all the discussions and all of the disagreements and all of the times that we go back and forth about who is invited to the table. And it came to me again. It's not our table. It's the Lord's table. He does the inviting. He extends the welcome. So I mean that in the sense of thank you for enabling me to look at this story again, because that part of it I had never thought of before. That was so out of character for my father to just assume that he could do that, but it was at his house and it was his taking. And so I hope that we take with us out of this, and I wanted to do it today specifically for this particular Sunday in time. I hope that we take with this out of here today, that in the holiday weeks ahead, the 6 or 7 weeks that we have coming at us, that we would look at the real stories of our family, the real stories of the people around us, and attempt to see them through the eyes of faith, through the words of Jesus, and see the truths of Scripture, because they play out over and over and over again in our lives. And as a postscript, I will tell you this. I remain to this day a lousy cook, but I can sure set a table.
Thank you very much. Well, we're done a little bit early, but, we can certainly, visit with each other a little bit. Let me check this, bell ringing schedule, and we're in good shape. So we've got Sam's covered, and, and the next week, we're pretty close to, we've got just two slots open on, Walmart merchandise store on December the 3rd.
Who's up for Wednesday, the 26th? What's the list of people?
Wednesday the 26th.
This-
Right, I mean, the 26th.
Yeah.
This week,
Yeah, I just looked, we're good.
I mean,
Yeah, we've got Larry, and Roger. Oh, well, we even got Marshall out there ringing. All right, so we're, I've already run 3 times this time for the Kiwanis Club and our Sunday school class, and, people have responded pretty generously out there right now, and, we've been lucky to have some really nice weather so far. But thanks to all the class, and again, as an invitation, to our, social, on, the 6th of December, everybody, Kathy is, and, there's this place over at, what is that place called?
Abington Glen.
Yeah, they reserved that place for us, and, so it looks like we're gonna have a good crowd, and, I guarantee you we'll have plenty of fried chicken and chicken tenders if we bring the stuff to go with it, so.
Steve, I've invited 3 people that have been in this class forever, that haven't been in here in a long time. 2 of them can't, the other one told me Friday night that they're gonna do their best to come. So if others feel the same urge, but I just thought it was time to maybe try to get some of these people that hadn't been here, and when I say years, I mean years.
Well, I tell you what, we've been very fortunate. This class is growing. We got a lot of new people in the class. We can remember the days, I guess, when we were probably maybe 70 people in this class, and not all here at one time, but, and I'll make sure that we invite, the preacher and, Jennifer, to come to the social that night.
Right now, there's I believe 45 on there that's signed up.
And yes,
Many years ago, I worked with Jim Gregory, and so I have seen him within the past week or so at a luncheon, and he actually asked if Mary Ann's name was still up on this board. And I told him yes. So it was a pleasure seeing him again, and she's going through some situations which is adversely affecting what he can and cannot do, but he looks good. So I just thought I'd send out that bit of information.
well, anything else?
So I would like to thank some folks in this class, contributed items when we sent the list around several weeks ago to pack the Christmas bags for the seniors who come to senior morning out here. So thank y'all for helping with that.
Dan?
I mentioned a couple weeks ago, Aubrey Cochran, some of you, in the class, of course, been around for a long time in this class. I mentioned Aubrey Cochran and what he and his wife Jean have gone through most recently. Aubrey had his, another operation this past week, and, They repaired some of the screws and things that had been put in his back before that came loose, and they found some other things, but, the gist of it all is that he, was fixed up pretty nicely, and he was able to get up and walk, and he hadn't been able to do that in quite some time, so he's improving. I just wanted everybody to remember Aubrey and Jean, good members of this church and this class, how they're getting along.
Fantastic. Well, I will, yes.
I was thinking, been thinking here for an hour. Peggy, sure can set the table, I'm sure, but the one thing she could really do is tell a story.
And I will just say for the Parable Garden, we basically cut the last of the collards this week, been putting leaves out on and, on the thing, and we till it in the soil to let it rot during the winter time to build up, some of the, things, but, gardening season's about done. We still have probably about 800 onion sets that we planted that won't be harvested in spring, but, so thanks to the class for helping that, happen, that, got a great faithful group, for women and men, they come and help with the garden, but, anyway, well, everybody,
I'm really sorry, just really quick. If you guys hear of anyone hiring revenue or whatever in like corporate, I lost my job, my new job, on Wednesday. So, it's gonna be a very interesting Thanksgiving and Christmas for my family. No severance, no pension, no 401k. It's my second job loss in 2025. So my emergency fund was depleted the first go around. Like, I'm not a bad steward, that's my point. I'm not blowing it like the parable sign out on a party. I was paying my mortgage, you know? But if you guys hear of anybody, even if it's like entry level, I'll take it. I just need to be able to like pay my heat, yeah? Yeah, so I'm in a bit of a pickle this year, unlike literally any other time in my life. So, yeah, so just, if you hear of anything, I'm not expecting like a miracle job or anything, but like, I will happily apply, yeah? Thank you.
okay, folks, have a great Thanksgiving. Yes, ma'am.
You want me to take that?
Yes, yes, you can take that, I'll save me a trip. All right, go have a good one.
Hey, Marshall.
Good to see you.
Good to see you too.
Thank you for the card you sent. When I saw the handwriting, it reminded me of my sixth grade teacher. He was big on beautiful handwriting. I feel the best I felt since being I have a second opinion.